All right, now we're going to look at what it's like to work a scene. So every year I go and I do some training at the Body Farm here in Texas at the Forensic Taphonomy place. And what I do is I train police officers and future scientists on how to collect insects off of a dead body. So I got permission to record this for you so you guys could see it as well, since I can usually only take 3 or 4 people out into the field at a time in order to do this effectively. So you are now going to watch the training that I give to actual officers every single year, so that you can, so they know how to get me evidence off of the body. Now, I do want to do a very quick warning. This is gory. We're going to be looking at actual dead bodies. Do remember that these are people who have donated their bodies to science, and so the reason we're able to go out there and do this is because of the kindness of these families and of the people who died. Because of that, and this is one of the reasons that we can only take 2 or 3 people out there at a time, we have to be very, very respectful to these bodies. And so be understanding that this is somebody's loved one and they're doing this for the sake of science and for the sake of training and that sort of thing. So please don't screenshot anything like that, because we can get in a lot of trouble, as can you. So just watch this and know. If it gets a little too gory, you get some good close-ups here. You can just close your eyes. But this gives you an idea of what I do at the scene. And if you are going into forensics, this is what you will be dealing with on a regular basis. So this is a great way to determine if you can handle it. All right, enjoy.
So when we do forensic entomology, we're in the sort of gooey phase of decomp. We have to, or we come in when the body's been there long enough that it's started decomposition, but not so long that it's gone full skeletonization. So depending on where we're at, like here in Texas, that can be anywhere from just a couple of days in the summer all the way to a couple of weeks in the winter. I've worked cases where we went from fresh body to full skeletonization in just over 24 hours. So it's sort of a limited timeline when you're going to see the maggots. And for those officers that have worked with bodies before, you know the maggot smell, and it's this. So what our job here today is going to be finding the oldest insects we possibly can. We want to know which insects showed up first on this body, because insects can show up very, very quickly after death, provided that there's access to it. So you're not stuffed in a freezer, or you're not in a house that is like fully insulated and all that jazz. Okay, so out here, we expect the insects to show up right away. And there have been anecdotal reports that they've shown up within 15 seconds or within a few minutes. And anybody who has ever, left something out at a picnic knows that insects are really good at where they're trying to get. So we want to find the oldest insect on the body. Usually with insects, that means the largest. So we're looking for the largest maggots. We're looking for the biggest beetles, that sort of thing. But we also want to make sure that we have a good representation of what is on the body. And we'll walk through exactly why back at the lab. So the way that we do this is when I come out to a scene, and as a forensic entomologist, I actually don't go to scenes very much. Instead, we actually have, our trained lab techs and our trained crime scene investigators pick up the evidence for us, and then we can just analyze it back at the lab. That's one less person that has to be wandering around that crime scene, which is why you guys are here. You can do it, and then send it to me, but correctly, which is why you're here. Oh, there was... I just can basically tell you stories all day is really how this is going to go. I worked one case where they sent a 5-gallon bucket full of maggots. Do you know how many maggots are in a 5-gallon? It's a lot. It's every maggot. And then anytime somebody sends me stuff, I have to put eyes on that evidence. So there's a dude's name in my I hate you book. And if I ever find him, I'm going to punch him in the throat. All right. Take that out of the video. Okay. So what I do is you want to get a general idea of where the insects are on the body. So I always come in and I just take a couple of minutes looking around, do that right beforehand. Insects will show up at natural bodily openings and wounds. So in a body that doesn't have any wounds on it, we expect to see them in the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, anal, and vaginal openings. If they are elsewhere, that means that there was some sort of wound there, usually. I want to get a general idea of where the insects are on this body. When you get up to this one, you're going to see that she's got some massive masses in the anal and vaginal opening. She has one mass on her knee right here. That can either indicate that there was a wound there before death, or this body has been here for long enough that the flesh has started to open and these maggots are just moving into other areas. Okay? But I want to make note of where I see big clumps of maggots. We call these maggot masses. This is indicative of where a lot of these maggots have been laid all together. So they have this method of feeding called exodigestion. If we have a huge number of maggots, they are super efficient at digesting a body. So they will actually puke up all their guts or their digestive juices and sit in this sort of soup of digestion and then sponge everything back up. Okay, so that's why they're really good at what they do. And the more maggots that we have there, the faster they're going to digest that body. That's why if we see a body that is away from the insects, it just doesn't decompose in the exact same way because it doesn't have all these digestive juices. It mostly mummifies and the tissues dry out and things like that. So that's what we're looking here. So here we've got this maggot mass on the knee. We've got some underneath her. Maggots like to be protected. Because if you think about this big bad world out here, there's all these things trying to eat them. So the maggot mass will help protect them. You can see that going on right here. But they will also go underneath the body a lot of the times. And that just gives them that little extra bit of protection. Other insects coming in will have a harder time getting to any individual maggot if it's hanging out. You will also see them up into the vaginal opening, up into the anal opening, down the throat on really fresh bodies. Even if it doesn't look like there's maggots there, if you check down the throat, anal opening, vaginal opening, you will likely find some in these nice protected areas. Those are also a little easier for them to get food purchase on. So you'll see a picture of what maggots look like. And they have these teensy tiny mouth hooks. They don't have like big jaws where they can't take bites out of things, and especially not bites out of bone. Okay, so they're going to be feeding on areas like mucous membranes, very early on until decomp really gets going, and then they're going to move that bacteria to the rest of the body. Okay, so I just do a quick visual survey and I try to pick out areas where I see the largest maggots. Now the maggots we're looking at today, these are very common this time of year in this area, and they have a really good indication. The biggest ones tend to be the oldest in this particular species. Now I've just done this for a long time so I can tell species on site. I will teach you some basic tips and tricks when we get back into the classroom on how to do that. But if you ever come on a body where there's, you just can't quite tell what the maggots are, what you want to do is, rule of thumb, for every maggot mass, get about 50 maggots to collect. Okay? You keep those separate. And so I've only given you a couple of vials today because we don't need that many. But if you're at a scene, I would prefer to have more than fewer, but not a 5-gallon bucket worth. Instead, about 50 maggots of all sizes from each maggot mass area, and then just let me know where it's at. If you get something where you grab some of the biggest, some of the middle, and some of the smaller, that gives me a really good snapshot of what's on here. And that's really all we're trying to do, is collect everything that was possibly on here. So we're going to start by looking at going through the body and picking stuff up just very quickly. But you're going to take your forceps and you're simply going to jump into a maggot mass and grab what you can with forceps. Now, if I was working a fresher body and I needed to go up various tubes, I have these comically large forceps. These are literal joke forceps that you can buy at the joke store, and that's the only place I've been able to find them. But they can get inches and inches up into the anal opening, down the esophagus, and that'll get me maggots that I haven't gotten otherwise. In a case like this, when the maggots are pretty much outside, I probably won't use these because it's also super gross. As fun as that is. All right. So here we've got the maggot mass. When you get the chance, sort of stick your finger into this maggot mass, they generate their own heat. And this is one of the reasons that they can live really well in an area where it's really cold. So even if it's frozen on the ground, if you have a full maggot mass like this, they're going to generate their own heat and they're going to be able to survive. So we see these maggots working in a maggot mass because they can feed better, they can control their temperature better, and they're much more protected. So we just see this a lot. All right, so what we'll do is you want to go through here and sort of check out which are the biggest maggots Okay, so we've got some really big ones right up top here. You notice there's some slightly smaller ones. So I'm going to go through and just collect about 50. Now, when I say about 50, you don't need to sit here and like count. I got you exactly 50. Mostly what I do at the scene is I will use my fingers, and it'll just be a quick pickup just like this, and they will go into that vial or go into that collection kit. Okay, so then I'll go through, double check that I got everything, make sure I have a good sampling there. Then I move to the next space. Okay, so I will do the top of this body first, checking up the knee, probably had a wound there, vaginal and anal openings where I can get it. You'll notice that there are these embedded maggots right here. So what they're doing here is maggots will breathe, or they will feed head down, butt up, because they have breathing holes in their posterior end. They breathe through their butts, basically. So this allows them to live in this very liquid environment because they're just breathing through their butts. So they're nice and packed right here. So I want to reach into there and grab a clump, about 50 or so, of that maggot mass. Then I'm going to go up here, and you'll see that she's got some here on her shoulder. She's got some definitely down her throat there, got some in the ocular orbit, some very tiny ones happening there. I'll want to get some of those. Okay, now what I'm noticing up here is there are some very different species right here than we're down there. So this is the second most common species that we have here in Texas. It is especially common in the heat of the summer. I'll tell you how to ID them, but down here we've likely got the secondary screwworm. Up here we have the hairy maggot blowfly. What's nice about these is they're really easy to ID on site. The maggots look very, very different. Okay, so rule of thumb, if you see a different looking maggot, even if it's within the same mass, get 50 of those too, just in case. You're just trying to get a good representative sample. Okay, so then I'm going to do that. Then if I need to get underneath the body, if I'm at the scene, what I do is I wait until they're removing the body from the scene so I can get underneath there. So when maggots are disturbed, they're going to go to a place where they can hide. They really like digging into the soil to do that. So in a body like this, if there's a lot of danger overhead, or if it gets too hot, like in the middle of the day, these maggots will dig down into the soil underneath where it's slightly cooler and just feed on the drippings. So even if there aren't maggots on the body, if there should be, you're going to be taking soil samples underneath to find them. So I'll just keep telling you stories. But there was one case that I worked, and I'll probably tell you that a little while, but one case that I worked where it was a body that had been there for, I think, 63 hours, we eventually figured out. But he only had these teensy tiny maggots on him, and he was just out in the middle of the open and nothing else. He should have had huge maggot masses. It was so hot that day that all the maggots had just gone underneath. And so we had to wait for the body to leave. I dug down and I found the maggots about 6 inches underground where it was cool enough and where the liquid was able to get down there. That made sense to me. The fact that he had almost no maggots on him didn't. And that's the thing. I expect maggots to be there. If they're not there, I have to figure out why. Okay, then we're going to move them. Now, once maggots are done feeding on a body, they get into a big group and they migrate away, or they wander, we call it, away from that body. They do this because it is kind of dangerous being a maggot. There's a bunch of other insects and birds and animals and things trying to eat them at all times. Okay, so when they turn into an adult fly, they have no way of protecting themselves. So they pupate, and we'll show you what the pupa look like back at the lab. But they have to go to a place where they're protected to do that. If they stay on the body, the likelihood that they can be found by things that are trying to eat them, pretty high. So they will just move all at once sort of away. And the oldest ones go first, of course, because they've made it through their development. Now, in order to capture those, it is very easy to miss maggots that got here first and have wandered away by the time you found the body. So what we have to do is we have to do a simple, just basically a grid search around this body. I do just a circular pattern where you want to walk around the body. And what I'm looking for is in the soil, I am looking for any movement at all. So I'm looking for any type of insect activity. I start very close. In rough terrain, the maggots won't go far. They don't have that ability. They might go just underneath. But in flat terrain like this, they can go upwards of, the most I've seen them go is about 100 feet. And that's usually on the smoothest surface inside. So here I'd go about 20 feet out. And you just do these simple circles. So if you look right here, there's a maggot just sort of wandering over here. The maggot here is likely older than the ones on the body. If I miss these maggots that have wandered away, I'm going to underestimate how long this body has been out, because I'm just trying to figure out how old these maggots are. So I have to find these old ones. That's usually what happens if somebody sends me evidence and I give a time of colonization estimation and I'm a couple days off. If they didn't do searching, that's usually where I can find that error rate. But it's just an error rate you have to deal with. If you don't find the evidence, you don't find the evidence. So we have to do this search, and you just sort of do a very simple search like this, and you step out and you keep going. And so it all depends on the terrain. Around here, I expect the mags to go not too far because there's bodies stacked up one right next to each other. So there we are. So we're going to search for that. If I was out at the scene, I would be taking some soil samples as well, usually at the compass points, from where the head is, from where the maggot masses are, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. A lot of times the soil samples come back empty, but I'd rather have them than not. So if you take evidence from me at any point, soil samples from under the body and then some soil samples in concentric rings, just a little bit out, to make sure I know what's going on there. Okay, so I do that walking around here. This one's a little bit fresher over here. So this body is going to be a little bit harder to actually find the maggots on. This is where we're going to have to go into the orifices. There are some adult flies actively feeding and laying eggs right now in the natural bodily openings. So you'll be able to see that. But there's probably going to be maggots underneath. So as a team, we can sort of lift him up and look for those maggots there. Now, in a really decomposed body, like one of these, so here the tissues have pretty much dried out. I expect to see mostly beetles instead of maggots on this one. So this is just the succession of different insects. So certain insects like a body fresh, other insects like it really gooey, still others like it really dried out like this. And it's the beetles that mostly do this, but they're going to be hiding underneath that outer surface of that mummified skin. So I need to get into the abdominal cavity. I need to get down into the esophagus. I need to get underneath and see what I can find there. A lot of times when we transport bodies to the morgue, maggots, if they're in the body themselves, that movement inside the body bag will freak them out and they'll try to run away. So what I like doing is if I get to a case early enough, I want to be there when they open up the body bag at the medical examiner's office, because then I'm collecting whatever maggots just came out in a panic. And that's so much easier for me as I don't have to actually get in there. If I can go to the autopsy and get some samples there, that's good too, but it's not necessary. Oh yeah, this guy's got some interesting injuries on him. So these are injuries. This is post-mortem feeding, it looks like. So those ants, those fire ants that Sophia was talking about, they do feed on bodies, but they don't have the ability to take away big chunks. It's not like they're taking chunks out of the body, and they don't feed the same way that maggots do. Instead, they sort of scrape off the surfaces of the skin here, and it leaves what looks like almost burns or drag marks or things like that. So that's very, very common in maggot feeding and in cockroach feeding, for that matter. So cockroaches can leave the same damage on the body. So that's what we're looking at there. So take note of what that looks like, and come and get some collections. Do you have any questions on how to do it? Yeah.
Just in general, do you ever collect live adult species if they're around?
Not really. So the adults that we're seeing here may or may not be laying eggs. So the flies, in order to be able to lay eggs, they need a protein meal. The males, in order to produce sperm, they need a protein meal. So what we see is adults showing up on a body like this and feeding on it in order to get protein. And then adults showing up that have already protein fed. It takes about 48 hours after eating protein in order to produce a full batch of eggs. They're showing up to lay their eggs. And usually we'll see males on the plant around waiting for those fertile females to come in so they can mate with them while on the body. So you will see a lot of mating on the body. But while taking a sample of the adults that are around the body can be helpful of what we expect on the body, it's not necessarily indicative of exactly what it is. And when you're at an active crime scene, it is a pain in the ass because flies spook easy. I mean, there's one or two species that don't, but they spook real easy. So if there's a lot of people walking around taking a sample of what's there, I'm only going to get the slow ones. and it may not tell me what's there. These are just hungry flies. So I really don't do the adult sampling because it takes too much time. It's a pain in the ass. And I'm not really going to get much. If I'm doing research, I will do passive sampling. So I'll use a trap. I'll use sticky traps. I'll show you what those are back at the lab so I can get an idea what's out there. But for a normal case, nah. If I need to get adults, I can rear out the maggots. And that gives me a really good adult that I've reared under good circumstances so they're not broken or gooey or something, and they're much easier to ID that way. Any other questions?